Hey guys and fellow whiskey lovers, welcome back to Malt Mariners Whiskey Roads. And the Whiskey Road will take us back to Sweden today, to the small distillery of Smögen. If you follow this channel already, then you have seen a video of the tour through the distillery, and you have seen an interview with Pär Caldenby, the owner, founder, and the one-man producer of the whiskey of Smögen. It's quite an impressive small venture on the west coast of Sweden. The distillery was founded, I think, in 2010, as far as I remember. And for the details of the distillery, please check out the tour video and the interview with Pär. It was really nice of him to have me there, to host me. So I stood with my camper van beside the distillery, and we had a great time with the interview. And in the evening, we sat together, sipping some whiskey, some world whiskeys, discussing whiskey industry and our common passion about whiskey. And the thing is that actually in the distillery and up until this day, even though I have heard a lot about Smögen distillery and Smögen whiskey, I have yet to try the peated version of Smögen, which is this basically what Smögen is known for. Smögen is a small distillery that produces heavily peated single malt whiskey, and it's inspired, as Pär mentioned, by the Islay malts like Ardnah Hoe or old school Islay whiskies, and also the Long Row brand of the Springbank, which is a very renowned and very famous distillery in the nerds area. So every whiskey nerd that loves Scotland knows about Springbank and knows about the peated version Long Row, which is one of my favorite brands. And now I can't wait to try this whiskey, because on site, in the interview, I tried the Askeim, the non-peated version, the triple distilled version of old barley types like Golden Promise, for example. And in the evening, I tried in the interview a version of that from smaller sherry casks. And then in the evening with him off camera, I tried Askeim, a bourbon cask version, which I really liked. But I'm not going to try this in the video, because this is basically the time for me to finally taste some. I got some really nice samples here from Pär, and this is for me the time to first of all taste some Smögen whiskey, the original version of this whiskey, which is basically a heavily peated Swedish single malt. And why is this so interesting to me as a whiskey fan, as a whiskey nerd? Well, first of all, it's a one-man distillery. It's a very small, crafty distillery. Pär has small pot stills. I will show you some pictures. And they were made by the original Scottish coppersmiths from Forsyths, which is, to me personally, always a bit of a geeky detail that I very much enjoy when I see world whiskey distilleries outside of Scotland. And one thing that I remembered always when I wrote an article about Smögen a couple of years ago when I worked for a German online shop, and I did some content creation, some content marketing, so copywriting, writing texts about distilleries. And when I wrote about Smögen, the first thing that I remembered and comes to my head is that this distillery uses warm tub condensers, and this is a very traditional old school method of condensing the spirit, the fumes, the alcohol fumes that come from the still inside the still. So you have to make them a liquid, obviously, back again, and the condensing method is usually shell and tube condensers, which is a very quick and effective and efficient way of turning back the alcohol fumes into liquid. In the old days, this was made by so-called warm tubs. They're called warm tubs because it's basically a copper pipe in a spiral, and very, very long time ago, this was just put into a river to cool it, I think. And nowadays, these are sitting in big water tanks. And there are a couple of distilleries in Scotland that use warm tubs today, and some of my very famous distilleries, some of my very favorite distilleries use warm tubs. For example, Edredour uses warm tubs. Old Pulteney on the north of Scotland uses warm tubs. Mortlach, I think, uses warm tubs. I'm actually not 100% sure, but Craigellachie, Craigenmore, for example, Benrinnes, also Speyside distilleries that use warm tubs, fantastic whiskies. Especially Craigellachie, one of my favorite distilleries in Speyside, with a heavy peaty, not heavy and meaty flavor profile, because warm tub condensers will give you mainly a very meaty kind of flavor. That's what the Scottish would call it, and I personally feel like the flavor profile of a warm tub condensed whiskey tends to go in a sort of mineral, sometimes metallic, and very fruity kind of flavor. It's very hard to say what exactly, because you know everybody tastes and feels differently about the smells and taste. But I personally think that many warm tub condensed whiskies tend to have this nice umami kind of meaty flavor, and usually quite fruity flavors also. And now I'm really curious to see, to put my nose into this. So first of all, Smögen produces a lot of small batch whiskies because it has a very small output of only about 10,000 liters a year. Pär told me that he's aiming to produce a little bit more than that, but that's roughly the numbers we're talking about. It's a very small venture, so the whiskies will equally be very limited in small numbers, and they're obviously not a very cheap whiskey to begin with, because to be honest, the only way to make cheap whiskey is to make quite a lot of it, and that only the really big companies can afford to produce whiskey in great bulks and numbers. And sometimes that equals to a standard or unified quality that might not really satisfy the palate of the common whiskey nerd like me. Some of those do, some of those don't. I'm not saying that big distilleries are necessarily making worse whiskey than smaller ones. I don't think this is true, but in this particular case, I'm very curious to see what Pär is producing, especially because he's a very nice guy and he's very nerdy and clearly he knows his stuff. And when we talked about his distillery, and you can look that up in the video, obviously, to experience that for yourself, I personally had the very strong feeling that he very much knows what he's doing, and he is creating something that he personally thinks is a very good product. Just have to put on my light here. Sorry about that. Forgot to. So now we have even more light. Yeah, I'm certainly need to make a cut after this. I'm very sorry about that. So I think we're back. Yes, so I think now we're back with the third light on. I hope that everything is fine before that. No worries. So, yes, and I have here a version that is called 90 proof bourbon barrels. I think this is what it's called. It's 9 years old and it's 51.4%, and this is non-chill filtered and natural color. And the other one that I poured is a tawny port finish bourbon and port cask, 10 years old, and it is 53.8%. Obviously, all of these whiskies will be non-chill filtered and uncolored. No caramel added, which is great. And now I'm putting my nose into this whiskey, and I waited quite a long time to try this. So I'm sharing this with you guys. I'm sharing this first impression experience with you, which is actually my favorite thing to do. And I think it's the biggest reason for me to do these videos, because I just feel it's always interesting to see how somebody reacts to a whiskey that he tries for the very first time. And in this case, I've visited the distillery. I know a little bit about it. So now let's stop talking and let's start smelling and drinking. Cheers. Skål. Oh yeah, that is a very peaty whiskey. I love it. When I tried the Askeim, I was a bit like, oh, this is actually not very peaty, but that's the unpeated version. Okay, let's see. Peat, analyze peat. The thing is, like, peat versions, there's an Islay peat. They're like quite tarry, quite burnt ashes, bonfire-y, sometimes even seafood kind of flavors. And then there is the Highland peat, which comes from the northeast of Scotland, somewhere near Aberdeenshire. Glendronach and Tomintoul, for example, uses this peat, I think, as far as I remember. But this smells very much like Islay peat to me. So no, I'm not 100% sure yet. Let's see. I'll have to take a bite first, but it's very interesting. I smell like a bit of burnt heather, burnt hay, burnt pine trees, something like that. Which could be both. This could be Islay peat, this could be Highland peat. I personally don't know which one it is. I just know that the peated malt comes from Scotland. Or I assume it comes from Scotland. I read about it that it comes from Scotland. So Pär, I'm really sorry if this is wrong. Please correct me in the comments. But as far as I remember, this is peated malt from Scotland. Yeah, very light nose, lightly peated. A nice roasted barley type of flavor. I'll take a bite. Oh no, I'll just smell it. I'll just take a nose of the other one before I bite in this one, because this is the tawny port version. And my nose might be killed off, the palate might be a bit influenced when I drink this one first. So it's always a bit of a tricky problem if you drink 2 whiskeys in one sitting, but I just wanted to try both and share that with you. Yeah, you can definitely smell that there's a different cask influence here. It's a bit more winey, a bit more red berries, kind of different colors obviously also. Like this is natural color, so you can certainly see that there's a difference here. It's a bit lighter in the bourbon cask, a bit darker, a bit redder with the port cask. A bit of winey sweets, like red wine gums. Bit of raspberries, bit of red berries. Yeah, the whole shebang. So now I can't wait. Sorry to keep you waiting for that long. Cheers. This is the 9-year-old version, bourbon cask, 90 proof. Skål. Oh. What I have to say, I'm not surprised that this is very good whiskey. Dry, heathery, lots of hay going on, like dried grass. It's not that peaty actually, as I expected it to be. Yeah, a lot of bread, like rye bread, the crust of rye bread, for example. Nutty. Walnuts, maybe? Not sure. I'm a bit hesitant to put water in this, but I certainly have to. Yeah, I mean, this is really nice. A lot of stone fruit here, like this bitterness that comes from stone fruit in a good way, like not the bitterness that I personally don't like. It's also, interestingly, quite subtle, because Pär said he uses a lot of fresh casks, intense cask influence, and sometimes I usually tend not to like whiskies that are overpowered by the cask. This one is actually quite, even though obviously after 9 years, if you get this kind of color, this is certainly like either a first fill bourbon cask or at least a second fill. So it's not a single cask whiskey as far as I know. Personally, I don't really care about this too much. But it's also quite delicate. I'm quite surprised. I thought it would be much punchier, much more intense, more cask influence, even more peaty. I have to think of Art Nouveau, which is incidentally, it's not really a coincidence, I think, because I think that Pär has a very close relationship with Art Nouveau, and he knows the distillery very well. So it smells and tastes a little bit to me like what I would expect from Art Nouveau. I only tried Art Nouveau twice, and it reminds me a little bit of this. I would certainly blindly put this into a Scotch, like I would certainly say this is a Scotch whiskey. I'm quite surprised. Like, I'm not surprised because I know that there's nowadays a lot of people that make good single malt whiskey that equals Scotch whiskey in the quality or is better or different in a certain way. But this is certainly something in a blind tasting. I think most people would put this on Scottish soil. I also can see the similarity to Springbank. I understand that Springbank is one of Pär's inspirations. So there's a lot of grain in here, a lot of cereal notes, a lot of. It doesn't hide the fact that it's a distillate made from grain, which I like. I personally very much tend to develop a taste for spirit-driven and more cereal-driven whiskies. That's very good. I quite like it. I will put a drop of water in this, but no. 3 drops, it's a bit. I poured the whole dram, so. And then we wait a little bit, and then I'll go back to, now I come to the port cask, the bourbon and port cask, which is a little bit higher in ABV. It's 53.8% and it's 10 years old. Yeah, this has opened up also. So it seems to me that it's very recommendable to let these whiskeys sit and breathe for a while. Obviously what I'm doing here is a bit of a speed dating, so I can't really sit here forever to wait until the whiskey opens up. And I'm also very impatient, I have to admit. I'm not a very patient, I'm not a very patient whiskey drinker, that's what I want to say. Quite creamy. There's a lot of cream in here, like raspberry, cassis. Can I say that? The black currants. Cheers. Skål. Also not as peaty as I expected it, but very good, tasty, spicy, nice wood dryness, lots of spices coming through here. Almost a bit of clove. Like, I wouldn't expect this in a single malt whiskey from bourbon and port cask. Cloves I usually get from bourbon and from rye whiskies. Bit of licorice. Yeah, I had a lot of red berries. Like, yeah. I think I'm quite surprised. I think I actually like the bourbon cask more. I mean, I'm not surprised because in terms of I like bourbon cask matured whiskies, but with this one, I would have expected that I would like peaty, and port cask usually is right up my alley. I'm a big fan of these kind of whiskies. There's a Glenglassaugh peated port version. There's the Lafroig Brodier, which they don't do anymore. It's a shame. It was a fantastic whiskey. So usually I really like peat and port in a combination. Just in case if you want to go crazy, and if you're one of those people who say never mix a whiskey, then I would recommend you to try and mix a tawny port, like literally a port, not a port cask, but a tawny port, with a peated whiskey. For example, Ardbeg or Port Charlotte, 50-50. Make two like small glass, 2 cl port, 2 cl Ardbeg, 2 cl Port Charlotte. That's a banger. I love this drink. It's a very, very nice combination. I think port and whiskey goes together very well. Not with the cask only, but as a drink in total. So this is really nice. So now I'm going back. I'll take a sip of water, and I'm going back to the bourbon cask because I think this is actually the more interesting whiskey to me personally right now. I have 3 more here, and I'm maybe trying this on a German channel. I'm not really sure yet. I have the Askeim, the unpeated version in cherry octaves. I already tried this, I think. Then I have the Askeim Golden Promise, which is quite interesting. Bourbon quarter cask, 8 years. I'm quite curious about this one. And then I have a 12-year-old, which is bourbon and 3 sherry casks. Also very interesting. So I might try this one on the German channel. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I definitely want to try the 2 that I was most curious about with you guys and share those with you. So let's go back to the bourbon cask. Obviously my palate will be a little bit tainted now due to the higher ABV and the port cask. Is tainted the right word? Influenced? Numbed? I don't know. Sorry about that. A little shout out to the Whiskey Neighbor, a new whiskey channel from Canada that I just discovered. I love to watch like world whiskey channels. I generally love to watch English-speaking channels in general, but I'm a big fan of connecting the world's whiskey drinkers, and yeah. So if you want to check out Canadian channel, check out the Whiskey Neighbor. Very nice dude. And if you haven't heard of them, if you want to try if you want to watch a very entertaining Scottish whiskey channel, I would recommend the Grail Whiskey Tastings. It's 2 girls and they make a fantastic job. They're so much fun. The bantering and their comments on the whiskey, it's spot on. Women, girls is sounds a little bit strange. And I actually met one of them by accident when she was working for Deanston. When she was a tour guide for Deanston, and I was as a tourist there. And 1 or 2 years ago, I saw her on YouTube, and I figured, I know this face. I can't remember. And then I went through my pictures of Deanston one day doing a tasting, and then I saw her face, and I thought like, oh, that's where I know her from. So the whiskey world is very small. But let's go back to Sweden and Smögen. Yeah, this is certainly this is a whiskey right up my alley. This is like a malty, caramel, roasted, burnt things whiskey in terms of like, it's very tasty. Almost a little mineral, a little salt in here if I'm not 100%, if I'm not wrong. But I could sit here and sip this all day. So the bourbon cask is certainly my favorite pick here. It's very, there's a lot of fruit going on, like yellow fruits in the finish, like not in a, right at the point where you swallow the whiskey at the back of your tongue and your throat. That's a really nice spot to taste whiskey. And there's a lot of yellow fruits in here. Yeah, I mean, I could sit here and babble along for another half an hour, but I don't think that's very, very interesting and entertaining for you guys. So what's my first impression drinking the peated whiskies of Smögen? First of all, I'm quite surprised that they're actually not as peaty as I expected them to be. Although we have to say this is like 9 and 10-year-old whiskey, so the peat might be reduced a little bit to the younger versions. Not sure about that, but yeah, they're certainly not, in my personal opinion, they're not as peaty as Islay whiskies like Ardbeg, Laphroaig or Lagavulin or you name it. But I quite like that. I think they're quite refined. From the peat level, they remind me a little bit more of Ben Romach, I would say, or Springbank. So somewhere in the mid-range of peat. In that case of where the peat is more a flavoring part of the whole dish, one of the ingredients in the dish and not the whole dish. You know, it's not like slapping in your face with peat, but that's actually something that I personally really appreciate. The warm top condensers, can I smell them in here? Can I taste them? Not so sure. I mean, in the bourbon cask, yeah, I think there is some of this meatiness, but it's not something that is very predominant on the front line for me personally. But yeah, nice whiskey, very good. I would certainly recommend you get your hands on a bottle of Smögen if you want to try Scandinavian, Swedish whiskey. And if you're a single malt Scotch whiskey connoisseur and you like these kind of whiskies, then I'm pretty sure you will like Smögen also. Especially if you maybe do like a world whiskey tasting and you want to represent some of the European or the Scandinavian or the northern parts of Europe types of whiskey, I think that Smögen is a very good pick here. If you want to try, like, if you cannot get your hands on a bottle of Smögen because it's not imported to your country, maybe High Coast will be an alternative. High Coast might be a little bit further distributed, but I'm not really sure about that. It's also a very nice whiskey. Yeah, so these are at the moment my favorite Swedish brands that I certainly like to sip and enjoy and share with people in tastings. Thank you, Pär, for having me at the distillery with sharing your whiskey with me. This was very nice, and obviously because these are free samples, I have to include a declaration, a transparency of that this is marked as advertising, because I wasn't paid to do this video. I did this on my own accords, but obviously the whiskey was gifted to me, so I have to mark and label this video as advertising. Yes. Right, that's me. What do you like? What international whiskies do you like? Have you tried a Swedish whiskey before? Have you tried a Scandinavian whiskey before? What are your favorite non-Scottish single malt picks? Maybe also peated. Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this, share the video, like subscribe to the channel, that certainly helps. And I will certainly see you guys next time down the road. Cheers and skål.